Welcome to Ask Sean, where I explore all sorts of questions about being human and invite you, the listener, to become more present to yourself, your relationships, and your life. I'm Sean Slevin, a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And if you have a question for me, you can send that to me anonymously at asksean.org. So in this video, I want to talk about guilt. In particular, kind of variations of the question, should we feel guilty? Should I feel guilty? Should you feel guilty? Is guilt good for us? Does it serve a useful purpose? Or is it some leftover thing from, primitive history or terrible aspects of religion or whatever? Is this a thing that we need to outgrow in order to live well? Is it a thing that we need to learn how to live differently with than maybe we tend to? What in the hell should we do with our guilt? Is this helpful at all? Or is guilt only ever bad and problematic? So I got to thinking about this in part because of a recent podcast I was listening to where they were talking more so in the angle of, letting go of your guilt, getting rid of your guilt. And I can understand where they were coming from and even agreed with some of their points. And also, this is a question that comes up, with clients, comes up with friends. If you've been watching my videos, you've heard me talk about some of my own grapplings with guilt and with shame and kind of things that are different for me now versus once upon a time. But I kind of want to do a little thought experiment here with this. To start, I want to think a little bit about, what would the world be like? What kind of a world might it be if somehow in a magical way, right, we could abolish guilt? If we could make it so that none of us felt guilty anymore. Now, I think one of the initial really tricky things is if that's the only thing that we're changing in our magical scenario, if it's still a world that is imperfect, if it's still a world where we make mistakes, if it's still a world where sometimes we intentionally hurt each other, then I think it's really tricky, really problematic to not have guilt, right? If somebody intentionally hurts me, especially, we'll make the example simple, for the moment. They intentionally hurt me. If we are going to have any kind of repair, any kind of reconciling, I need them to feel guilty. And I need them to be able to acknowledge that guilt. And I need them to apologize. In the same way, if I don't feel any guilt and I hurt somebody, why should I care, right? Like what is there in me if I don't have guilt? What in my psyche, in my soul, is going to incline me to be like, well, that's your problem. I just stole your car, but whatever, get over it. Go steal someone else's car. Why should I care about you and your pain, right? But it's that clearly doesn't work relationally, right? If I have hurt somebody or if someone has hurt me, there needs, whoever has done the hurting needs to be able to say, you're right, I can see how I hurt you, and I'm sorry, right? We need to be able to feel some guilt. Now, this can get into all sorts of complexities of what kind of guilt, what are the different, the different shades and forms of guilt. It gets into questions about shame, shame versus guilt. Is there healthy guilt? Is there unhealthy guilt? Thinking about just some of my own history, it's okay, if we're hypothesizing that there's something about guilt or some kind of useful guilt that is necessary for repair to happen when we have failed each other, when we have hurt each other, then, are we saying, okay, well, I should beat myself up right? Because that's something that a lot of us have practice in. Should I call myself names? Am I a piece of shit because I hurt this person, because I failed this person? Whether it's, a failure of, forgetfulness, right? Like they asked me to take care of something and I forgot, and I let them down in that way. Or it's a failure of, I was just feeling selfish and I'm like, I don't want to do the thing, and I let them down that way, right? Like what are we meaning by guilt here? So I definitely want to distinguish between guilt and shame, because these are so often conflated in our culture. And granted, people can define these differently. So I want you to hear the essence of what I'm talking about. If you use different words, that's fine. I'm not going to die on that hill or anything. I think the way that I'm defining it, I think has some usefulness. So that's why I'm offering it to you. But I think about guilt as being to do with behavior. So I did a bad thing, I failed to do a good thing. Whereas shame is about my whole person. And this is where, at least in the way that I'm thinking about and defining shame, I don't think shame is ever useful. Now, sometimes there can be some ways about thinking about shame. There can be some nuanced categories that maybe hold some usefulness. It's like sort of maybe a nuanced form of guilt in some ways, maybe. We're not going to get into all that. I'm not trying to tease that out here. I'm thinking just sort of broad categories. Whereas guilt says, I've done a bad thing, I failed to do a good thing. Shame says, therefore, I'm a bad person. Although usually, shame doesn't stop at that, does it? Shame says, I'm worthless. Shame says, I don't belong to have relationships. I don't deserve love. I should be cast out. And that's kind of part of what shame is related to, is it's this deep, visceral, primal fear that I will be cut off from relationships, cut off from community, that I'll be cast out of the tribe, and I'm going to get eaten by, a tiger, a dinosaur, or whatever. Which is like, that's serious stuff, right? The problem is shame doesn't tell us the truth, right? Shame takes something that is true, which is, I do fail people around me, right? I fail to show up fully. Or I show up in ways that are unloving, right? I get triggered with my stuff and I don't realize I'm triggered immediately. And so I'm, behave in a jerky way in some kind of way. Or I'm just caught up in my own world and I'm not paying attention, right? I don't tune into what's going on, with someone. Whatever, there's a bazillion ways, right, to fail each other. So, that's about behavior, right? But shame says, because you failed, because you're gonna fail, you can't have value. And I think I think it's not true. I think it's not useful, right? Like that doesn't, we get some small motivation, a degree of motivation out of trying to avoid shame, but it doesn't help us grow. Nobody really grows through shaming themselves. When I used to call myself names and say, I'm so stupid, I can't do anything right, that was not a healthy guilt. Like that was going from, I had made a mistake, which I needed to be able to face, but I was so overwhelmed by my failure that it grew into, it grew into this shame. This very shameful, like just annihilation of self kind of feeling, right? And so like that's really toxic, right? Like I shouldn't do that to myself. I shouldn't do that to others, right? So in our, kind of our exploration here of, is guilt good for us? We want to be really clear that we're not talking about shame. I do not think that shame, in the ways that I'm defining it, this sort of like devaluing of self, this like whole person, I'm terrible kind of thing, right? Like that's not useful. that doesn't help repair, right? If I have failed a friend and, they're confronting me about something and I'm just like, oh, you're right, I'm so terrible, I just da-da-da-da. Like, that's not actually going to help them feel repair. Because then they're going to feel like they need to take care of me. Like, I've actually been on the other side of that. I've had experiences where somebody has let me down and I try to talk to them about that. And what happens is they go into this shame mode, or I've my own journey. I can go into shame mode, either side, right? We can go into this shame mode. And what that does is it actually blocks connection. It's a subtle form of defense, right? Like, if I beat myself up, then maybe, I can deflect you, right? But you can't have real repair with that, right? Like, so this kind of gets us thinking about, okay, well, so what is a healthy guilt that leads to real repair? I have had some beautiful experiences of this recently where some friends have confronted me with some things, right? I'm thinking about one friend in particular who asked to meet and was like, hey, this thing has not been feeling good about our relationship dynamic. It's not been feeling good inside of me for a while, and I need you to know this and need us to talk about it, and I need to understand it, and I need you to hear me and for us to work towards it being different. And in order for that to go someplace constructive, I had to be able to handle hearing that I might have failed them, that I might have hurt them. I had to be able to not get defensive, right? I had to not get overwhelmed with shame. And I had to be able to be, and so then from all those things, I had to be able to be really curious. And I asked a number of questions because I wanted to tease out and really understand what are the subtleties and nuances of how they are not feeling good and how maybe I have let them down. And then from that place, I was able to look them in the eyes and say, yeah, I see what you mean. You've really needed me to show up in these ways, and I haven't. I've been showing up in these other ways, and I have hurt you. I have failed you here. And I am so sorry. I am so, so sorry. I didn't realize I was doing that, which doesn't make it okay. Though it's worth saying, as long as we're not saying that in a defensive way. There's a difference between like, oh, I knew that was going to hurt you and I did it anyway, right? Versus like, I was oblivious. So yeah, there's a place for acknowledging like, I really didn't know, and I'm really sorry. I have hurt you, right? That's a tricky thing, right? Like, if really owning and facing our guilt, having a healthy guilt is like not using the I didn't know or I didn't mean it, as a deflection, but as an admission, actually kind of a further admission of guilt of like, I was clueless. Like, part of my guilt here is I wasn't even tuned into that. And that's a wonderfully humbling thing for me, right? Like, oh, I'm a therapist, I'm a counselor, and I know all sorts of things about human beings, and like, I'm blind to stuff too, right? Like, I have blind spots too. I have places where I'm like, I'm just caught up in my own self. And it wasn't even, this particular thing was interesting because I wasn't triggered. It wasn't anything like that. Like, I wasn't being selfish even. I was just blind to something, right? And so I didn't realize I was hurting my friend in this way. And that doesn't let me off the hook, my blindness, right? Like, I'm still responsible. I'm responsible to hear that. I'm responsible to take it seriously and to own it and to like really work to understand. And so this is healthy guilt in action, right? Like, healthy guilt, I think an element of healthy guilt is that it's about truthfulness. It's about accuracy, right? And that was what was driving me. Is like, in my conversation with my friend, it's like, I want to understand all the ins and outs of this. I want to get at every nook and cranny of how have I let you down. Not so that I can beat myself up, not so that I can tell myself I'm a piece of shit, like, because those things aren't true. It's like, no, I have value. You have value, right? Like, I don't need to lie awake, at night thinking about this, like, but I want to face it and I want to own it and I want to grow, right? Like, So I want to really be sure I get it. Like, okay, so was it like this? Is that kind of getting how I failed you? Like, okay, no, it's not quite like that. It's a little, some of that, but then, okay, it's some of this. Okay. And so, and what about this moment? Was that hitting it, or was that not, like we talked through a number of things, because it's like, I don't want to miss anything, right? Not because, this is tricky too, right? That can turn into another defense of like, okay, I need to examine this thoroughly so that like, I never get confronted again. It's like, well, no, I'm going to fail again, right? Hopefully not in this exact way, right? But it's like, there will be future things because I'm in process. There's always going to be shit that is like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know I was hurting you that way. But I can now see how the way that I've been being, like I haven't shown up as like I would wish to, and as you've needed me to. And so, yeah, like it's in some ways it's an interesting example because it has a lot of nuance and subtlety to it, right? Like it's not just like I wasn't even being a jerk, though I can be a jerk, right? Like it had a lot of subtlety, but I needed to be able to let my heart hurt, right? This is part of healthy guilt, is like, I love my friend and it hurts my heart to know that I have failed them in this way. Like, I need to let that sink in, right? I do need to feel bad there. Not that I'm a bad person, but I want to feel the subtleties and reverberations because I want to fucking remember this, because I want to work on it, right? I need to take it seriously, Like, this is what helps us, not burn our hands repeatedly, right? Is that it's like, the stove is hot, right? There's an intensity there, right? And part of my trying to show up for my friend and for myself is that I'm trying to take some of the responsibility and bear some of the burden of heightening that intensity. Because here's the thing, relationally, right? Like, if I keep downplaying and I'm not really taking it seriously, then that kind of forces the other person to have to carry all of that, because then for the sake of the relationship, to give the relationship a chance at repair, they're going to have to get louder and say, no, I don't really feel like you're getting it. This is really important to me. I need you to hear this. This is what this has felt like, right? And this is where, there's an appropriateness to raising our voice sometimes, like now that's easily can go off the rails and get unhealthy, but it's like, I'm trying to help this is a big deal. Like, please listen to me. Now you can feel there, right? Like, I'm not going to demand, that's part of the subtle distinction, in terms of keeping that, sort of that like intensity piece in a healthy place. Not going to a demand, but it's a pleading of like, I need you to hear and get that this is really important to me. Now, this gets so tricky, right? Navigating relationally, in terms of navigating repair, is that because most of us are not practiced in being able to manage our guilt. Like, manage isn't even the right word. Maybe you could use the word manage, but I don't know. Our guilt needs a shepherding. It needs help from us because it can really be miscalibrated. And that's maybe some of where I think I was agreeing with like this podcast, right? Is that I think we absolutely have to keep calibrating our guilt, right? So in terms of further honing in on what is healthy guilt, like if a big part of healthy guilt is that it's accurate, right? Then I've got to get better at really being able to discern what actually is my responsibility and what isn't. What is my culpability and what isn't, right? Because, there are going to be places where people feel hurt, or I feel hurt, and I've talked about this in other videos, and some of that hurt is not something that anybody should feel guilty about. Some of it's just, hey, I just need you to hear that this hurt, or oh man, I heard that was really hard. I am so sorry. Like, I'm so sorry here in the sense of I really care about that and I'm sad about that. But sometimes it's like, yeah, I don't actually see anything that I can apologize for, and there. Or sometimes it's a mix, right? Where it's like, oh, I can very much own this piece. I can see where I really failed you and let you down there. But there's maybe another piece where it's like, yeah, I'm not yet able to connect with sort of my culpability in that, right? And again, culpability here isn't about what, even what my intention was or whether I was aware or not, right? We're still culpable of the things we're blind to, right? Like I said here with my friend. Like it wasn't on my radar, this thing that they brought up. But as we talked about it, I was like, oh, I can see where they're coming from. I can see how that's been happening subtly, and how, like, yeah, I haven't been a very good friend in this way. Like, and even there, I mean, my language can be a little tricky, but I'm really meaning that in the guilt sense, not like I'm a bad person or even a bad friend in a holistic sense, but just in I haven't behaved as a good friend, if we're used to make it a little more cumbersome, right? Because that's the spirit of what I mean there. Even though we use these shorthands, but I'm not meaning that in a shaming way. So, but yeah, I was really working to try to get accurate. Like I want to understand all the nooks and crannies. But to do that, I had to be able to handle my failure, right? Which means I've had to practice facing my failures again and again and again and again. And so for, I would say most, if not all of us, we're going to start this kind of process with a lot of defensiveness, a lot of like having to come back and apologize for how poor we did at our apology, right? We're going to have to do like apologies in stages. And that can be even helpful to just own on the front end if you can. To say, hey, I know as we get to know each other, or as we become closer friends, or if you think about partner relationships or whatever, you can say this in a moment where you're not in the midst of a conflict, right? You can say, hey, I know I'm not great at apologies, and I have work to do on that. And so I'm just trying to own that. And apologies for me are going to often have to happen in stages where I get defensive initially, and I have to come back, apologize for getting defensive, and try again at apologizing for the original thing. And then even then, I'm probably going to get defensive pretty quickly, and then I'm going to have to pause, and I'm going to have to come back later, right? I mean, it's just, we're messy, we're messy, and it's in process. None of us just does something perfectly out of the gate. I mean, none of us do things perfectly, period, right? So we need to be able to have a frame for that, have grace for that it's that we're in process. What matters is, what am I aiming for? Am I setting my course, my compass heading on expanding my capacity, like my emotional ability to look myself in the mirror and be like, yeah, I screwed up here. And to not feel overwhelmed and like annihilated by that, right? So often, right? So in addition to the defensiveness, often there's going to be a lot of work we have to do around shame. We have to really we have to do a lot of difficult work of being able to push back against shame, being able to have a boundary in a sense with our shame, being able to question our shame, being able to disagree with our shame. So that's a lot more work than maybe I think I'm going to go into in this video. And in some ways, it's so specifically personal, right? Like certainly, if this is bringing up things for you as you're watching and listening, and you want to send in some questions and kind of give me kind of a detailed example and some nuance, I'd be happy to respond to that. Yeah. Like because that's such an important part of the work. Like we can't do this work of cultivating healthy guilt and refining, if you will, our guilt barometer, our guilt thermometer, our guilt sensor. We can't do that work without first clearing out space, right? Where we're not just feeling overwhelmed by shame. But even then, even when we've cleared out some space, defensiveness just likes to creep up because it's like, this doesn't feel good. I've let somebody down. I've hurt somebody. They're upset with me. That can hit all sorts of stuff out of our backgrounds and out of our childhoods. Lots of fun times. And it is better for us, and certainly better for those around us, the more that we can look those things in the eye. It has been some of my, this is such a funny thing to say, but some of my favorite moments, not only favorite moments, but some of my, honestly, highlights for me in the past 12 months have been several different moments where I have been able to apologize really freaking well. And what I mean by that is like it's been such a joy for me, even though it's painful, right? But it's been a joy because it's not what I naturally do, right? Like I have had to work really fucking hard to cultivate this ability, and it's still in process. It's not perfect, right? But it's felt really good to have these moments, these experiences where I could look a friend in the eye. And there's several different moments, different people, and spend the time of really trying to understand, and in a really specific way be like, I get it. I see what you mean. I failed you in this kind of way. And make sure that I'm getting that right, listening for their, confirmation, and then being like, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm really sad about that. This is important to me. You're important to me. We're important to me. I want to work on this. I take this really seriously. And it's not even that I'm even saying exactly all of those words. It's the spirit of that, right? Because you can say I'm taking this seriously and like be blowing somebody off, right? It's about the feel of, no, I'm invested. I am all in. You have taken the risk of bringing up something hard, and I am really listening and watching for what can I take ownership of. And again, in that healthy guilt kind of cultivation, I'm being mindful of, if I can't own something, I'm not going to own it. It doesn't mean I dismiss it, right? And say, hey, that's really important, and I see that there's pain there. I'm not yet able to connect with my part in that piece. That doesn't mean I don't have a part. I'm just not able to see it yet. So I do care about it, and I am sorry about it. I'm sorry that I've hurt you there, and I'm not able to offer the kind of apology that I would like to be able to, like with authenticity. And so I don't want to, I don't want to fake anything. And I don't know if that means there's something there that's just yours, or if there's something I'm not able to see yet. And if you can maybe help me with that, that would be great, right? But yeah, it's like I'm really trying to, not in a defensive way, but just I just want to be accurate. I just want to understand. I want to be accurate, because I want to know what is and isn't my stuff. Because if I don't want to make things mine that are not mine, because that doesn't work, like that, you just spin your wheels, right? It's just confusing, and it doesn't really repair, not in a true way. You can use that as a defense, a subtle defense. Oh, I'll just take all the blame for things, right? Just so you're not upset at me. But that's not repair, right? Repair is, no, I'm actually going to let myself feel uncomfortable and do that in front of you so that you can feel that I am feeling the pain of this, right? That's meaningful. That's entering into the suffering with you, right? That's healing. When I've been able to do that for others, when others have been able to do that for me, it's like, these friendships where we've had these hard conversations, man, I treasure them so much more now. I treasured them before, but it's like we have deepened intimacy, right? Like this has been so meaningful, so special. Like this is one of the fascinating things. We think that a close relationship, we can tend to think that a close relationship doesn't have conflict, and we just, get along and everything's great. But the closest relationships are relationships that have had difficulty and had conflict, and they have repaired, and they have repaired, and they have repaired, and they have repaired. And it's like the relationship is welded together so tightly because it's like, oh, we have faced all of this different shit, all these different failures, and we have been able to face them and own them and apologize and repair. And it's like, we know because we've experienced that, man, we are tight. Right? It's not that I know that you're never going to fail me. It's that I know that if you do fail me, you're still in this and you're still for me. And you know that if I fail you, you know that I'm still in this and I'm still for you, right? That we're still for each other and we're still in this relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a family relationship, whether it's a partner relationship, whatever it may be. Like that is fucking powerful. Like that's intimacy on a next level. We have such childish ideas about intimacy in our culture. Like we've reduced it to like, whatever. sex swinging from the chandelier or something or whatever. And it's like, and I mean, sex is great, you know, glad for folks to enjoy that intimacy in the right context. But it's like, that's just one little piece of connection, right? I mean, if you have a relationship where you're having lots of sex and yet you can't talk about anything hard, like that's gonna run out of steam. Like sex is not enough. Like it's just not remotely enough. But if you have a relationship where you can fail each other and you can look each other in the eye and be like, I am sorry. I am sorry in these specific ways. Then whatever sex you have in that relationship, in that partner relationship, is going to be way more meaningful. Because you've already been practicing kind of getting naked, so to speak, with each other, right? You've already been being vulnerable. You've already been facing your shame and holding limits on that, right? So that's what actually, this is one of the things that makes for good lovemaking, for good sex, is the courage to face our hurts with each other. The courage to be honest with each other. Of like, hey, you really hurt me. And for the other person to be like, oh my goodness, tell me more. I want to understand. I was not aware. So, you know, this might be bringing up all sorts of different things for you. If you have hung in here with me watching the whole video, I want you to really kind of check in. Check in with your emotions, with your body, with your mind, your thoughts. You know, kind of what kinds of things are coming up for you? What things are asking for your attention? Is there somebody that you need to share something with of like, hey, I need to tell a friend that, or your loved one, someone that, hey, I'm not feeling good about this aspect of our relationship? Is there somebody that you need to go back and apologize to because they maybe have confronted you with something and you kind of dodged it? You didn't fully engage. Notice what's happening in your body, right? The ways that your heart rate might be increasing, the ways that, you know, it feels scary. And just try to stay with that, right? Try not to run away from the discomfort. Do whatever you need to try to, you know, soothe your body, not to make the emotions go away, right? But just to try to ride them out, right? This is how we build our capacities. You know, what do you need to do to hold yourself, to help yourself sort of stay with it, just move through it, right? Maybe there's things that you need to reach out to somebody, you know, a counselor, a mentor, family member, but yeah, somebody to kind of talk through some things with. Be like, yeah, I'm realizing I'm struggling with telling somebody, you know, that they've hurt me, or I'm struggling with shame, or I'm struggling with, you know, I'm confused about like what I'm guilty for and what I'm not. What is actually mine? I mean, that's one of the ways actually additional way that we refine our guilt is through conversation, not in the like, hey, just take my side. That doesn't help us, right? Like it's like, no, if healthy guilt is about accuracy, about truthfulness, it's like, help me really see this, because I sense that I have a part in this, but I'm not sure, is it all, how much of it is me and how much of it might be some of the other person's, and I really want to own mine, but I know that maybe I tend to over-own, or I tend to under-own, or whatever we know that our tendency is in terms of our defense, our, you know, ways of avoiding. You know, we talk through with friends of like, hey, how do you see this? Help me, and how do you see me? And help me. I really need some honest input here. And not that they have a perfect sense, but the dialogue is part of our facing things. We're pushing back against shame to do that, right? Like, it's part of the practice. So pay attention to what's coming up in your body, in your emotions, and your thoughts here, and listening to and engaging with all of this. And then, like, let it matter. Let yourself sit with it and ponder kind of what would be next steps for you. Well, until next time, Peace be with you.